I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I was going to ask my friend from Pennsylvania whether he had talked to the Senate and thinks this has any chance of moving this week. And the answer I think I would give is no, it does not. So I agree with him. It would be tragic not to act. It's tragic that we are acting in a partisan fashion which almost ensures inaction on this, the last day that we're going to be here. We should be acting in a bipartisan fashion, as I've urged the Majority Leader to do. What is a bipartisan fashion? A, considering the emergency need today and funding the resources necessary to respond to that. B, taking under consideration the substantive legislative changes that can be affected that will help this issue. We'll send the messages that the gentleman wants to send. He's my dear friend and a good member of this body. But I will tell you, this bill has had no hearings, no committee consideration. Yes, there was a partisan task force, but this has had no consideration in this legislative process. The Majority Leader last week told me that there would be no bill that did not get 72 hours notice. The gentleman knows you have a bill on the floor, which is contingent, of course, on the passage of this, which has had a few hours notice at best. Last night, I think at 10 o'clock, that the Rules Committee met on DACA. So I will tell my friend that had we acted in a bipartisan fashion, A, at whatever level of funding we could agree, pass a bill to meet the immediate crisis. B, have hearings on the ramifications of the law that passed with only 2 votes in opposition. Over 405 members voted for the 2008 legislation. We are changing that without a hearing, either in subcommittee, committee, or full committee. That's not the way we ought to be working. That's not good for our country. It's not good for this institution. It's not fair. So I would urge my colleagues to defeat this legislation. Is that my 2 minutes? Can I get 1 additional minute?
The gentleman's recognized for 1 additional minute.
I believe once again we find the Republican Party divided. And because they're divided, they're trying to cobble together some of their hardest line members so that they can get them to vote for this supplemental. And they put on a bill which has had no notice to people or to members of Congress. It's ironic that people are supporting this who demanded that we read the bills. There was no bill to read until this morning. How sad for the American people. We have a humanitarian crisis that must be addressed without delay, and the way to address it without delay is to give the resources necessary and then pursue the legislative process. Not together. It will slow it down, and I predict will not pass the Senate. And I think the gentlemen and ladies on this side of the aisle know that the Senate's not going to pass this bill. So if you really think we ought to act now, do so in a bipartisan fashion, and then let us debate the legislation before us. Mr. McCall just said this is a real crisis. He just said it just minutes ago. Mr. McCall, the chairman of the committee. This is a real crisis which demands action. The recommendation that's been made to us will undermine action by this body in the face of crisis. We should not pass this legislation. We ought to pass a very simple resource to the crisis now and legislation later. I urge my colleagues to vote no.
The gentleman's time has expired.